Hello, and welcome to today's live recording of And Then She Fell by Dreena Collins, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. From close by came the sound of young people shouting joyously, "Free." Their splashing enmeshed with the beat of the music. I recalled the pool with its faded, steep sides, the swim-up bar. I had left it much later in the trip than I had planned, this visit back to the Palace Hotel. I was not so brave after all. As I walked up the slope towards the reception, my stomach writhed, teeth clamped together, and all those other pangs and sensations in my flesh. My bones came back in the places where they had sat the year before, when it happened. Extraordinary. The doors closed behind me, and the ferocious air conditioning hit my skin. The lobby smelt salted and clean, just as it had last time. It was all as it had been. The receptionist was new, however, and continued on the computer as I approached. She held up one finger to show me she knew I was there, but didn't make eye contact. I wanted to scream at her, shriek. But then she lifted her head, curly dark, and beamed. "Hello, madam, how can I help you?" She spoke flawless English with hardly an accent. "My name is Catherine Keely," I said. "My daughter died here last year." He was still tucking in his shirt at the back as he came through the door behind the reception desk. I would recognize Alexander Dimitro anywhere, though his hair was shorter, less fashionable. Last year it had been spiked with gel or wax. Now it was drooping on his brow, and he looked harassed, tired. Perhaps he had been off duty or asleep. "Mrs. Keeley," he said. He put out his hand to me. It was limp, cool, and slightly damp. I placed mine in his, then gave it a firm shake. "Ms.," I replied. He gave a tight smile and curled his fingers together, clenching and unclenching them a couple of times as his hand fell back by his side. "I did tell them not to bother you," I said. "I just wanted to let someone know I was on the premises." "I will accompany you," he replied. It was not an offer. We walked through the small shop and across the buffet restaurant, where staff cleared the remains of lunch as others reset the tables for dinner. They ballroom danced around each other effortlessly. The warm smell of recently finished food was in the air, meaty, sweet. The decor was filled with brown tiles of varying patterns, some cracked and uneven, but it was clean, orderly, and bright. "You seem busy," I commented. "That's good." I threw the comment away into the flower beds flatly. Didn't mean it. "We have worked very hard, Miss Keeley. We have made many changes." I had seen no changes so far, but I said nothing. He walked 2 steps ahead of me on the fractured path. He hadn't asked where I wanted to go. I kept my eyes on the ground, spotted pink petals on the floor, a discarded bottle of lager, pocked with ants, a small dusty lizard scurried into the bushes. Alexander stopped. "You will see our new fences," he said, "very safe." The word safe formed and hovered in the air. It stayed near him, did not quite reach me. I looked up. Your block had been repainted a dusky pink. On each balcony, a white railing was now bolted on, raising the height of the wall by 40 or 50 centimeters. Armored. My eyes searched for your room, scanning up the building, desperate, seeking and yet not wanting to see it. The railing that should have been there for you. The sun was in my eyes. They prickled, hot and dry. I stumbled backwards as I craned my neck and winced. Confidently, Alexander took my upper arm and moved me up the path. Turning me around so that the sun was to the side, I took a moment, then I looked again. For some reason, I expected to see someone there. Foolish, really. But it was empty and looked the same as all the others. "We have signs too, see?" He pointed to a small white sign tacked to the wall by the entrance of the block. In English, it warned the occupants in blue uppercase writing that leaning over the balcony was hazardous. Presumably, the Greek guests did not need to be told. I looked around for further signs, beside and behind me. They were near every entrance, though the top letters on the sign in Block D were already overcrowded by a large rosemary bush. Alexander followed my gaze, and without dropping his tight, fixed grin, he took a few steps over to it, snapping the top of the bush away without comment, then striding back, light on his toes. The distinctive scent of the herb followed him. "They are also in the rooms, and we—" He looked at me mid-sentence and realized he had said enough. I was hanging, suspended, taut by a thread, and everything he said simply cut away, leaving me spinning. I started to walk back. He followed. We did not speak. At the reception, he stopped and put his hand out again, this time with more confidence and a genuine smile. But this is not why I was here. Actually, I'm not leaving yet, I said. I was hoping to speak to some bar or restaurant staff, if there are any here who worked last summer as well. Flagrant irritation covered his face. Why? He asked. Because I have some questions, I answered unperturbed. Just a couple of things that might help me to understand. Could I ever understand? But I needed to try. They've been asked those questions many, many times before. Yes, I'm sure, but not by her mother, I said. Losing a child is a catastrophic experience. It did not matter that you, my darling girl, were 26 when you died. The pain was different, no doubt, though as severe, I am certain. When you were a baby, I saw you as a fragile chick, a nestling who might stop breathing if I looked away for too long. I lived in a state of terror, amplified 100 times over by my exhaustion. This is the world of new motherhood. You were an appendage, a new brittle thing you might snap at the slightest touch or lack of it. I needed you near and to check on you 1,000 times a day. As an adult, I had different fears. I lived with a lurking dread that you might fall foul of someone else's malice or stupidity, as I was no longer close by to help. I feared you would be burnt, bruised, cut, caught in a fire or a lightning strike, smashed in a car accident, arrested for no good reason, broken-hearted. We were still like concentric circles. You were at the heart of me, focal, vital. Sometimes, as you grow up, I would be caught by a morbid fear if you were late running home or didn't return my call. Something terrible must have befallen you, some horrific incident or attack. I would hear an ambulance and imagine it must be for you. Think my luck was out. I was losing you. I knew I could not live without you. And little did I know, my fears were not so irrational after all. You were going to leave me too soon. In the days that followed the news, I felt distorted, physically out of shape, bursting outside of myself, those patterns gone. My emotions did not obey the curves of my own body anymore. I was exploding in heaps and sobs, porous, moving beyond my own perimeters. A brutal mess, and people could not bear to look at me, to see the oozing chaos of me and my pain. The rooftop bar here at my own hotel was at the edge of a small modern pool. Everything was tasteful, illuminated, uplit, rippling, soft. A contrast to the Palace Hotel, with its bright lights and brash sounds. The evening air was warm, vaguely scented. My scarf was lifted and pulled away from my bare shoulders by the breeze. I resisted the itch to lift it to cover my back again. Some days I was conscious that people might think a 57-year-old woman was too old for a tattoo. This was not one of those days. Healthy, squat palm trees and heavy pots rustled but stayed put. I could not wholly appreciate the beauty, the serenity of this place, but there was one benefit of coming back to Crete. I could avoid the discomfort and disdain of others. Judgment that I was not further along in my journey of grief. I needed something concrete, tangible. I still felt it as a raw, searing thing. 1 year on, several times an hour, I thought of you, my lost girl, and it distorted me again each time. The turmoil came back instinctively, primeval and pure. I could not settle into the quiet, sad shape that they wanted me to inhabit. I was not resolved and bleak. Why should I be? Part of me was still fighting against the story of your death, and I wasn't allowed to voice that. Never could, because to everyone else that meant I was in denial. I was not. Nothing could bring you back. You were gone, lost. I accepted that. But there were question marks, holes, and queries over so many details of your death, and I was still seeking the answers. You enjoyed your trip, Miss Catherine, yes? Nicholas asked as he cleared my wine glass and took away the remains of the tiny bitter black olives. Specks of broken serviette dotted the table like red ants. I looked down at the torn paper in my hand. Crete is lovely, I said. He paused. I think this has not been the holiday you hoped for, he said. I suspected he was referring to the weather, patchy as it was, or perhaps my neighbors in the hotel who had caused issues the night before, loudly attempting a shortcut back to the resort across a field of courgette plants. Something like that, I said with a smile. And now I will give you a drink, he declared, on the house. I smiled more broadly. A final toast to you. That would be lovely. I turned back towards the small segment of sunset that I could see between the flat roofs, terracotta, white, and the steep, craggy mountains to the right. There were crickets. There was mint, sage, and marjoram. I wondered if you smelt the same smells and saw the same sunset when you were here. Nicholas brought me a small bottle of sparkling wine in a fresh glass, frosty, clouded. I picked up the drink, tilted my raised glass towards the sunset, and took a deep swig. The bubbles felt raw and harsh against my throat. The wine was cold and strong. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine you here, to inhabit the space you occupied, to picture you again, but happy, free, laughing, to walk within your story. I could feel you, almost, yes, and I wanted to pull you in and hold you tight and wrench you inside and hold on to you. Hold on. I had hoped this trip might fill in the little gaps, the fissures in the story, and then I could tape things together and construct an image of you, delicate, buckled, and fragile as handmade paper, as you were. Then I could tell your story, your real story, and show all the people who thought they knew you now, who thought they could judge you, that they had had the wrong picture. An impersonation, a parody. Only I knew you. I had never believed the lies, the insinuations, but it was the last night of the trip, and I was no closer to finding the truth. And really, why would I be? All the key players were at home, not here in Crete, another world away. Your friends, Jessica, Sebastian, Daniel. What happened, Susie, my little girl? What happened to you that night? She tried to shut the door, but he had a flip-flopped foot, a hand, an elbow in the room. She could see the bridge of his nose, filaments of bristle on his upper lip. There was the sour tang of lager. Again, she pushed against the door edge. His fingers crunched like eggshells, crumpled, but he did not stop, continued to lunge and thrust. She had to give up. She leapt away from the door, taking 2 steps further into the hotel room as she turned, twisting in a fractured pirouette. Her bare feet skidded on the tiles as they raced towards the balcony. The door behind gaped, then crashed against the wall. She heard it. Didn't dare look back. Don't look back. As she yanked the sliding doors open enough to squeeze through. She was on the other side. She had one hand pounding on metal and glass, pushing, sliding the door, the other seeking the latch to lock it behind her. But he was there. His hands were there. A forearm burnt pink, hairs withered and frizzled, skin cracked and dry, rawhide. His abnormally large fingers fumbled through the tiny gap to grab her arms and block her way until she could not feel the doorframe anymore, could not hold on to anything. He pushed the doors further open and stepped through into the warmth of the night. She was staggering backwards and should be crying out. Didn't know why she couldn't. Staggering backwards while he clenched her wrists together. His hands encompassed hers and wrapped her left wrist over her right. She was pinned, entangled, and she pictured chickens strung up in the market, ham hocks on chains and hooks. She was squirming, pathetic, but not yet dead. She was not dead yet. She stamped one foot onto his, flicking her forehead back and forth, a broken puppet, trying to headbutt him. Missing, slipping, nodding, inept. She edged further backwards until she was up against the low tiled wall of the balcony. He smirked. This was as far as she could go. She sensed the back of her heels against the cool surface, the feeling creeping up her legs, her hips, as she pushed harder up against the short wall. This was the edge of the balcony. His face was next to hers, their arms and hands and fingers, a confused tangle of limbs over and under like a ball of wool, pushing against her chest and gullet. She could not breathe, did not cry, but still she leaned back, her body arching over the edge, away from him, as far as she could, while he tried to wrestle her upright. She felt the toes of her right foot touch something damp as she bowed further over, her foot slipping, sliding again, then a hand breaking free as her body jerked down violently. Then they stumbled together, they staggered, they skittered, and then she fell.